of braving this dry topic. So why did we want to have this conversation with you at this conference? It's because, legislation is really changing, not just in Australia, but in other parts of the world. And we think there's movement happening. I don't know if you noticed just this week, the ACCC is suing Google over data collection, location-related data collection. Right, so people are being sued in different jurisdictions as well, and there's a lot of movement in the space, and community engagement practitioners are really at the cold front of collecting this information, managing it, and sometimes stuffing it up, right? So we thought it was really important to have this conversation so everybody understands what are our obligations when it comes to data protection and security. And so we thought we'd sort of put this, Sergey came up with this topic, and we thought we'd do this session today. And so what we want you to leave with today is hopefully a bit of a better understanding about what your obligations are in your work situation in relation to the legislation and what you can do to prepare for it. So we've got some information that Sarah Jane's going to run through, a couple of quick little quizzes, which you can just do on your phone or your tablet, whatever. You don't have to go to the app, just to sort of test your level of knowledge and also to keep you awake, even though it's the afternoon. So that's the first half of the session. And in the second half, we've planned something interactive. And, we're going to do something really crazy and wild at an engagement conference, and we're actually going to engage you. So, crazy stuff. We've got some options of what we had thought of what we wanted to do with you, but we thought it's going to be the killer spot in the afternoon. So we'll actually put it out to you and see what you want to do. But like true engagement people, we're just going to give you some options to choose from, okay? So what colour would you like your motorway in? We're going to do that. So take it away, Sarah Jane.
Okay, great. So we're starting off with a bit of a warm-up quiz to get our brains working and use up all that sugar energy from afternoon tea. So we're not using the app, we're using Mentimeter. And so if you just go to menti.com and you'll see the place to put the code in at the top, which is the 106285. And I'll just switch over to Menti while you're doing that.
So that was 106285.
Yeah, it's up here as well, or it's a bit smaller there.
Everyone managed to get on there?
All good? All right, let's jump into the first question. Yeah, good. Let's get started. Yeah, so we're not ranking or points for these. So a data breach and a cyber breach are always the same thing, true or false? You've got a little timer down here, so you've got time to think about what you're doing. Yeah, good. Very good. Yeah, they can be the same thing, but not always. Yeah, the website's at the top of the screen with the login code as well if anyone gets kicked out. Locking my spreadsheet with a password satisfies data protection requirements. Oh, good. Yeah, it's not going to be enough. We'll come back to that later, hence the topic, ditching the spreadsheets. There are more libraries in the US than there are McDonald's. True or false? It's true. There are more public libraries in the US than McDonald's, which is amazing. It's going to make me so happy.
Coffee libraries.
Okay, so another fun one. The more chocolate a country consumes per capita, the more Nobel laureates that country produces. True or false?
Study stuff.
Yeah. There's obviously some quantifiers there about number of Nobel laureates per 10 million people, but yeah, it's a fun fact. As a not-for-profit or private sector business, you are exempt from the Notifiable Data Breach Scheme. True or false? Yeah, good. So there are different levels that make you come under the Act or not, but generally you have got obligations under it. Please rate the following: chocolate or ice cream. Maybe a few opinions have changed after the Nobel laureate question. Ooh. Yep, I think chocolate wins. Cool. Oh, sorry. A sole operator or small consultancy with under 3 million turnover does not have obligations under the Australian privacy principles. Yep, good. Awesome. You guys are really good. So, now we're all warmed up and energised. I've got some fast facts on data breaches to kind of get us into the content, but I wasn't sure what level of knowledge people had in the room, so I thought I'd set the scene a bit. So the Notifiable Data Breach Scheme came into effect in Australia in February 2018, and I became familiar with it and interested in it when I was working with my own team at Cannings Purple to develop our internal data breach response plan and data management plan. And then as part of that, I also became familiar with the communication requirements under the Act while I developed the templates that we have on standby should any of our clients or us ever need them. And the thing that I do find really interesting about the NDBS is that at its core, it's not there as red tape to make life for business harder. It's there to protect people, and hopefully that will become more apparent as we work through. So, here is some information about the NDBS. In that first year from February 2018, there were 964 breaches reported to the Office of the Australian Information Commission, who manages the NDBS. And there were likely to have been actually more than that fell outside of the scheme and therefore were not reported. Even so, this was double the number that they actually expected to get in that first year. 35% of those involved human error. So I think one of the reasons we discussed this topic was because there's a lot of misconceptions, and a huge amount is actually due to people just making mistakes. So only 2.5% of those were attributed to actual hacking, which is probably what most of us think of when we're talking about data security and cyber breaches and data breaches in general. So it's a huge difference there. And as engagement practitioners, if you're wondering why any of this really matters to us, 86% of those cases involved contact information being disclosed without authorisation. And as you'd all know, that's our main resource. We use it, we manage it, and we access it on a daily basis. So this is incredibly important stuff for us to be aware of so we can manage our practices accordingly. So, there are a few questions that come up. When do you have to report a data breach, and then what must you say? So there are two main criteria within the legislation for assessing when a data breach becomes notifiable. It's when information about an individual has been accessed or provided without authorisation, and then as a result of that access, the individual is put at risk of serious harm. And it's the serious harm that's really the key to this, and we'll come back to that as we work through. The things that you have to say once you've decided a data breach is notifiable, you have to tell them what happened to the extent that you know, and we'll come to investigation shortly as well. You need to say what information was involved, so email addresses, phone numbers, residential addresses, bank details. And then the next key thing that you have to tell people is any mitigating steps they can take to manage the risk to themselves. So if you're using the bank details example, you need to tell them or advise them to contact their bank as soon as possible to get further advice on what to do next. So, you know you've had a data breach, but you're not sure if it's notifiable or not. From that point, you have 30 days to do an assessment, and within that 30 days, whether it's 2 days, 14 days, or 28 days into that period, as soon as you decide it was a notifiable breach, you have to notify as soon as possible after that. You can't just wait for the end of the 30 days, which is obvious. If people are at risk of harm, you need to act quickly, and it's why having a response plan is so important. It's also important to note in that 30 days, if you decide that no one is at risk of harm, or if you're able to take your own steps to prevent that harm, so if you find that USB that was stolen, then you can choose not to notify. You're not required to under the Act. But for transparency, and it would depend on the circumstances, you may consider that it's the right thing to do to tell people what's happened anyway. And the stakeholders that you have to tell, if it's notifiable, are the OAIC, so the Office of the Australian Information Commission, and they've got a lot of information on their website to help you work through that process of informing them. But you also need to tell all of those individuals who are at risk of serious harm, and you have to demonstrate that you've taken reasonable steps to contact them. You can't just say that you sent an email and that was that. The other option is to tell all of the individuals that have been affected by the breach, and the difference is quite significant. So if your whole database has been hacked, for example, but you only held bank details for a portion of those individuals, you can choose to only tell the OAIC and those individuals that are at risk. But the issue being that, especially in engagement, we have, accountability and transparency, and it's important to be open with our communities. And it's important to make those considerations when you're considering who to tell. At the same time, the OAIC acknowledges that there's a risk of over-notifying people. If you tell them every time someone looked at the notebook on your desk and maybe saw their name, they may not pay attention when they get a notification about something that's serious. So it's really important to have those discussions with your team, with your legal team, to decide when and who you notify. So we're going to do another quiz now because I've been talking for a while and it's like information dump. And what we're going to do is vote yes, no, maybe on some scenarios to get a sense for some of these grey areas. So if you want to pull up Menti, you should still be logged in. Is everyone still logged in? Yeah, great. I love it when technology works. Cool, so leaving a notebook with a client's personal information written on a bus. Yes, no, maybe.
It's not started for them.
It's not started.
It's not able to answer the question?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just it's a technology guy.
Just today, hey, it's not really.
No. We never have problems.
Try and refresh. Logging in again.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, it's definitely a maybe. So it will depend on the information that is personal. And again, where you leave it. Is it got a chance of falling into the wrong hands? Was it their bank details you wrote down? Was it that opinion they've got on the bridge you're building? All of those things will play in. A hacker breaks into your computer, accesses your stakeholder database that includes phone numbers, names, and physical addresses, so where the person lives. Oh, it's maybe. The interesting thing about this is it really depends on what information you have on the hacker and whether they've shown malicious intent to take that information they've collected to then harass those people. One of the things that you might want to consider is that it has given them the physical addresses, and that means they may be susceptible to not just annoying phone calls or spam emails, but people knocking on their door. So it's another one that's got a few grey areas. You lose a USB with your stakeholder spreadsheet saved on it that includes names, addresses, phone numbers, and detailed project feedback. So you've been a good stakeholder engagement person, going out and doing consultation, recording that in your spreadsheet, but you've lost your USB. Yep, it's another maybe. So the key word here is lost. So if you took your USB out and you accidentally threw it in the bin with your coffee cup because you weren't watching what you were doing, the chance of someone accessing that information is probably quite low. But then the fact that there was detailed project feedback means that if they had shared some controversial opinions, or if it's a contentious project, there might be information in those notes that could put them at risk. So you'd have to look at the circumstances of the USB being misplaced. A hacker breaks into your computer and plants a virus on your machine. It's another maybe. You might have noticed what I'm doing here. The key with this one is that you need to find out what that virus is doing. If that virus is scraping your emails and then using that to spam people, that's probably a bit of an issue, and you need to do some investigation because the amount of spam might be affecting those individuals. Again, it could just be doing all kinds of weird stuff to your computer. So it depends on what the virus is actually doing. All right, so that's another quiz. Thanks, everyone. We've just got a little bit more content to get through, and then we'll get into the fun stuff where you can choose what activities you want to do. So we're getting into now the issue with spreadsheets, and there's quite a few. So as we said before, password protection is just not enough. The issue with spreadsheets is that you can't control what happens to that data. Pretty much anyone can go in, copy the information out, and do with it what you will. They can download it, they can do anything. And you may never know that that's happened. Sorry. Just get my notes up. Devices can get lost, laptops sometimes, USBs more often. And if those devices, all that there is a spreadsheet with all of that detailed, comprehensive stakeholder information on there, that's an issue as well. And even password-protected spreadsheets can be opened, especially if you email the password with the spreadsheet attached. Or if your password is cat123. It's not hard. And unless you are meticulous in your data management protocols with yourself and with your team, there's no way to ensure the integrity of your data over time. How do you know that that phone call that you wrote down in your spreadsheet is the same as it was now as it was 6 months ago? Anyone can go in, change a few words or a lot of words, and you may never know. And the other component of this is the storage of data over a long time. So under GDPR, which are European data protection laws, you are obliged to only hold data for as long as is needed or for the duration of your project. And if you're one of those people who's worked on a project for many years and you have tried to maintain your data integrity by saving another version and another version and another version of your spreadsheet so you can track what's changed, how at the end of that process can you be sure that you've safely and completely remove the data to which you're required to remove? And I know it's European laws, but it's really important to research and understand what those laws are, because their obligations are far-reaching, and it may be that just having a European citizen in your database is enough to mean that you are impacted by those laws. Why it's time to ditch the spreadsheet. This is my favourite bit. So the issue with this, that it's not just legal, it's about reputation and it's about trust, and it's your reputation and the trust that your community has put in you to look after their data. And I think as stakeholder engagement practitioners, people do tell us more things than they might tell their, other people. And so at one time or another in our careers, we will hold or have held information that if made available to the wrong people could put someone at risk of serious harm, whether it's because you've got a complete contact history, controversial opinions about a project that might not be accepted by the rest of the community, accessibility requirements because they've told you that they've got specific access needs that they've not made other people aware of. And you don't want them to be put at risk of harm because of a choice that you have made. And if we're talking about good engagement practice, spreadsheets are just not good practice anymore. There are so many other options out there, and they allow you to do in-depth reporting. They're easier for long-term project management, so you can manage your data cleanly over a long period of time. Spreadsheets aren't efficient. If you've ever had a huge database, you've got 500 rows and 6 tabs that you've got to go through just to find one stakeholder's comments from 6 months ago. Having a clean database means that you can manage that much more efficiently, helping you do a better practice. And so whether it's a custom-built system, a third-party tool, or just something in the cloud with multi-factor authentication, there's bound to be something out there that's better for you for your budget if you do some research. And at the end of the day, it is your reputation on the line and your choice to make. So, we do have one more quiz now, where we're going to look at your current practices in this space. And as you've seen, this is completely anonymous. So I really encourage everyone in the room to be as honest as they can be, or as honest as they feel comfortable being, because that means in the next part, if all you want to do is have a chat in your groups about things you've done, it will open up the room for better conversations. So, jump in. I clearly understand my obligations under the NDBS in the event of a data breach. Yes, somewhat, or no. Yeah, it's good. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you to the people that said no. It's good to be honest with ourselves, and it just means that we can go on this learning journey together. So understanding your obligations means you can understand the risks to you. You can then manage those risks, and you can take appropriate action when required. Just means you're better prepared. On a regular basis, or at the start of every project, you prepare clearly defined protocols for how to manage data and how it's stored and how it's shared. So that was a bit about that accountability and traceability we talked about earlier with spreadsheets. Should be able to slide it along and hit submit.
There's no line.
No slider.
No slider. Is it a value?
Just
So
like
between 1 and 10?
Just to see that.
We'll skip that one.
Yeah.
I spoke too soon. Anyway, the importance of protocol setting means you can manage your data integrity. It ensures that you and your team have clear expectations, not just on who put what's where, but when, so that information that they've collected stays fresh in their mind and they don't put it in a week later and it's not as accurate as it was if they'd done it at the time. And then that allows you to develop accountability as well, so that you can track who's edited what when. The stakeholders in my email distribution list have provided consent to not provided any consent, within the middle providing indirect consent. That's the same thing.
Same issue.
That's disappointing. So the issue with consent is mainly due to GDPR. I'll go back. Because under GDPR, you are required to have direct consent if you are like me and like doing online shopping from European websites. You no longer have to untick to subscribe from emails. You have to actually tick to say that you want marketing materials for European companies now. That's because of GDPR. And so again, you need to look into those and understand if any of your stakeholders, you need to have gathered more direct consent from them for you to be able to email.
Can I just explore that bit? So you said earlier that if you have a stakeholder who's under the European legislation, that you may need to comply.
Yeah.
But there's a jurisdictional problem there.
So-
that's like saying I have to comply to the laws of the state in the United States around driving or something. I just want to know how we think that lines up.
So I guess what I was trying to do with the GDPR point is, like, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal
I can
expert.
tell that, you've got a personality.
Thank you. But what I wanted to do was just make people aware that these laws are there and that they have different rules and more stringent rules to Australian regulation. And then I would encourage people to go out and do some more research to understand if there is, if they do apply to you or not. I'm here to sort of open up the worldview rather than say, oh, you've got one European in your stakeholder database. That definitely means that you can't hold their data longer than you need, or you don't have direct consent.
But I still want to challenge
I can add to that.
Because they're European, we're doing it in Australia, they don't have jurisdiction, we have jurisdiction.
Yes and no.
It's not.
Tell me how.
Yeah, it's not
Tell me
that
how.
clear
That's what
cut.
I'm
So
trying to understand.
if you have your database, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have obtained consent willingly and that you have a legitimate purpose for keeping the information, right? And you have to make sure the data is stored in Europe. So it depends on your project and what you're doing. So if they're living here and they're an Australian PR, resident, whatever, maybe not so much. But if you are actively engaging with people and seeking global feedback on an issue or whatever, this, if their residential status is not so clear cut, then yeah, they can complain. It's why, this was my point about Google being sued by the ACCC in Australia about something that's, related to Android, their disclosure on Android products. None of that is necessarily Australian. Cambridge Analytica came across like Facebook got caught because they used the British laws, the GDPR laws, to get Facebook, right? That's the only reason that all came about, is the journalists, American journalists applied under took it to the British court, took Facebook in the British court to task for saying, give me all the data you've stored on me. This is what the GDPR allows a person to do, is to request all the information you have stored on them.
So does the Australian rules. But I can talk very lightly to the GDPR from an IAP2 perspective, because we are going to a centralised global website, which means that the perception is that the GDPR is a high standard. It is the borderline, but it's actually got gaps. So when we look to create a global privacy policy for IAP2, it is incredibly complicated, Darren, and I have read all of the emails from lawyers and I still can't explain it to you. But what I can tell you are a few things. First of all, it is incredibly financially punitive if you are penalised under the GDPR, astronomically. Like, we could not afford to breach the GDPR requirements. It does not align with the American requirements. So if you think about IAP2, whilst we don't have an affiliate in Italy, we have licensed contracted trainers that are delivering training in Europe. So we're already, we were already in breach of the GDPR because the privacy policy that sat on the international webpage was non-compliant. It actually didn't even meet our requirements. So we've had to rewrite it. If we had rewritten it to best practice standards, we needed a budget of somewhere between £70,000 to £100,000 or euros to rewrite it, because it is a really major piece of work. So we've had to take a different approach, and we've used the UN examples actually, because you've got to look for what are exemplars of organisations that work in a global setting. Then the American and the GDPR requirements do not consider charities which have, like we have the status where we don't require people to opt in, we can require them to opt out, which is the approach that we've taken. And if you think about it from a member perspective, you come along to a local area network event because Allison invited you, and you hear all about them, and then you hear nothing, because if we took the opt-in approach, you didn't ask us to receive anything, so we're not telling you anything. So that, which is why as a charity we've used that. So we are trying to marry up the gaps that we've been able to identify through our own research on it. But it is really, really complicated, and the financial penalties for organisations and directors are in the hundreds of millions of of dollars.
California is also bringing in legislation next year, which is going to be, I'm told, on par with the GDPR. So I think the whole world is moving in that direction.
I don't dispute that. We're probably just challenging for clear information.
Whether they can get you.
If little Darren runs a project in Australia and somebody chooses to opt in who have a European citizenship, I still contend they don't have any jurisdiction if I.
Yeah, but you just said the key words, they've chosen to opt in to your project, to you keeping their data, and you have a legitimate basis.
As long as all of your disclosures around opt-in has that thing. For example, you've got to disclose how your cookies work to meet the GDPR requirements.
I can see it on the global scale, I totally understand it and don't recommend it.
Yeah.
Just-
Well, I think it's, when you look at it from a community engagement perspective, there are some serious implications for us. The European stuff aside, I think we need to look at the European stuff as almost like a warning of what's coming, because when it came in Europe, we saw a lot of organisations really come unstuck because, immediately, I'd say just about everyone was not compliant. They couldn't demonstrate transparency of what data they were storing. They couldn't, people have the right now to say, I want to see everything you've got on me and I want you to delete it. Think about spreadsheets where you have multiple copies. How would you do that? So I guess our point in including the GDPR stuff here, although it's not legislation for us in Australia, unless you're working on a more global kind of scale, is that it is coming and not too far into the future. So you're better off preparing for it now and how you're starting to collect your data than have it come in. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff happening in legislation here where they're doing it with the facial recognition software, all that stuff. There's movement at the station.
So how many people have a privacy officer within their organisation? So, okay, how many people don't? Okay, so we're all required to. Everyone's supposed to have a privacy officer. How many people, sexy words, how many people have a data breach response plan? Awesome. Yeah, we didn't have one until we had a data breach. Well, we've got one now.
And that's the key, and I think that's one of the reasons that we've got the checklist on the table and all of these resources and information is that it's kind of an if, not a when, not a when, not an if, and if it happens and you are not prepared and you have a big database or it's really serious, you have a lot of things that you need to do in a very short space of time. And I guess the purpose of today was not to scare people or say, you have been breaking the law, but it was very much just to open your eyes to some of the things that can happen so that you can be more prepared.
And
We should watch the time, actually.
Yeah, we do need to keep going.
Yeah.
Did you want to keep going on the quizzes, or did you want to do something else now? We've had a bit of a chat.
Let me just ask a question.
Yeah.
So you talk about data breaches as in if it could bring someone harm, but you can formally apply for information. So for a development application, if you put in a submission against it, you're not happy, that's publicly available information. It might not have my name, but it'll have my address, and it will have what I've written against the application. If the owner wanted to apply, they could get that information. They could knock on my door and say, how dare you? How does that and data breach kind of live together? Where's the line? Who writes the formal access application, which is legislated, or the data breach as well? Where's that?
Yeah, I mean, that's getting into privacy principles, right? Rather than data breach. It's not a breach of data, but it's what obligation does the council have to protect your personal information and not disclose it.
Because as a person, I might say that is a breach, given how I felt about it. Now I'm, as you said,
and it
this
happens
information
quite a
given
lot.
out without.
I guess that comes down to practice as well. So if someone has written and said, I want this information, maybe they could just contact you first and say, we've been asked to provide this information. There's no legal reason why we cannot, but we're providing you with, notice that that's happening, or, how can we manage this? We're in engagement. We're always about making people feel comfortable with things that have to happen,
Anyone from council here?
That's like more like an FOI, and then starting to slow like a third party consultation service where FOIs involves a third party. You would consult that third party
Is that what you guys do at your council as well?
It's just some information that is redacted, but some that is allowable you open. So my personal name and number, or you have to call me to say, can I release that? So that's understandable. But sometimes when you guys go through, or I live next door and I just
Exactly.
that goes through. And
Yeah.
Is it allowed to go through?
Wow.
They're supposed to redact the actual name, but it's
identifiable.
yeah.
Yeah, the redaction laws are fairly broad. It's like anything that's identifiable. Usually, is anything that makes you identifiable is redacted.
There's a discussion on it. And then,
Exactly. And the
actually,
application.
it might be redacted information where I actually had to send it back and say, look, I'll put the options in and see if it's redacted further. Because, the idea is that it's a one-step.
I'm just conscious of time. We've only got 30 minutes left, and we did make promise to be interactive and have an interactive session. We'll fail. IIP will never have us back again.
This is interactive now.
Okay.
And I'm in group.
Oh, okay. Special mate still. Excellent. Oh, look at Darren going, I don't know what he meant.
Is that a data breach?
So,
Was it this one?
our initial plan,
Or these options?
yeah, these two. So initially we were thinking, do we want to come up with a little draft plan for your organisation? And Sarah Jane's prepared a checklist that we could use. So that's option one, is to sort of in little groups actually come up with an outline plan. But I noticed about half of you already have a plan in your organisation, so that might not be so attractive. And then the second option we thought was maybe having some discussion around some key topics based on industry sector. So if there's, the local count, we could have a local council table, we can have a small practitioners table, because there's slightly different obligations. And so this was the second sheet we had on here. So, things like if you're a small business or sole operator, less than 3 million turnover, talk about sort of what your obligations are. If you're a contractor working in a client office, because a lot of people these days are being seconded into clients' offices, whose responsibility is it if there is a data breach? Is it yours? Is it the client's? What are your obligations? So we thought it might be worth sort of unpacking some of those things. So that's option two. And then just to be like totally tricky, we're going to give you a third option, which is we could have a group, because we're not a big group here, we could just as a group discuss some topics. And, we had some sort of discussion points that we put up there. So we're going to put it back to you. What would you like to do? So who'd like to do option one, come up with a draft plan? The hand up. You don't even vote once. Nobody. Awesome.
No one's in a planning.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. I think everyone's had enough of that. Who wants option two, which is like industry sector-based discussion? Couple of people, 3, 4. Who wants option three, which is just to pick a topic from here and discuss it as a big group?
And you can vote for these
Wow,
6
that's
topics.
kind of even now between option 2 and 3.
That's good. 3.
Three? Okay, well, get onto Mentimeter and choose what you want to vote. What topic, which of these, can you read it? It's too small.
You should be able to read it on your phones if it's too small on the screen, or I can read out each option.
Drop down.
We've got privacy considerations, we've got social media and other tracking, data breach response plans. Do you need one? It sounds like you all guys know that you do. What happens to the data at the end of the project? So future use, audits, legal challenges, sharing passwords to online systems, what's the risk, and then the global movement in privacy and data legislation, which is kind of what we touched on earlier as well.
How many votes do they get? Just one?
I think it's just one.
Okay. Whichever one gets the most votes, we'll talk about it first, and then we can move up.
You can choose blue and white.
Reduce many.
Oh, we get to spending.
I'm getting
Okay.
4 options.
Let's go with option one, the first one for now, because that's got the most votes so far. Okay, so the reason I put that one on is, so behind a lot of these discussion topics is a little case study we have as well that we thought we could share with you as a discussion starter. And this is one that I encountered where, at the end of a project, often we just get, a backup copy of the data file. Yeah, and we store it. And maybe we never check what quality it is. And so the scenario I'm thinking of is that there was a fairly legal requirement to access some of that data, basically a challenge, and the data file wasn't really usable, which they discovered only when they went to restore it and to see it. And the bits that they were able to restore had the data truncated, so they couldn't really prove their case because they just didn't access it. So it's almost the last thing we think of, when the project's finishing. We just think, oh yeah, just get a copy of the data, say zip it up and save it somewhere. So that was sort of what was behind that topic of bringing it up. So we're going to throw it to the floor and talk about what your experiences are. What do you do? How do you ensure that you actually, and then we have this overlay, of course, of this, what's your legitimate purpose in keeping the data? How long do you keep it for? If you're dealing with property acquisitions, for example, on an infrastructure project, what are the obligations there? That's where you're most likely to see legal challenges, and where do we draw the line, and what do we do with this? How do we manage this in a best practice way? Anyone want to start? Question or comment?
Probably just a question in general. Are there general things around the time period to retain data after the other project is completed? So it's how
So the question was, are there any general rules around the time that you should be keeping data, and how prescriptive is it? I think in very legal, some of the planning projects and infrastructure projects are really long term, and they have multiple stages, and sometimes you might have the planning stage and then it goes into the freezer for a couple of years and then it comes back. I think I know certainly in those circumstances they have a legitimate basis for keeping the data and they want to keep it and test it. That would be my advice, is just test the backup data you've got. There's lots of times when we've been given backup files for a client to say, can you restore this now? We're ready to start the next phase. And we go and look at the data and it's pretty crap. It's only got the first so many characters of meeting notes and stuff like that. And this is pretty legal information when you're talking about rezoning people's properties and stuff. So seriously need to, I don't know, it's something that as an industry we should actually discuss and come up with a standard. As far as I know, do you know of any standards, Christian?
There are some. So health and research have legislation that tells you how long you have to keep data and where you have to keep that data.
For research and health related issues?
Yep, and it'll be between 5 and 7 years.
I was going to say, as a journalist, when I was a journalist, the practice around keeping notes in case you were sued for defamation or something was always to keep notes for 7 years.
So your professional indemnity insurance, so you'll try to have that for 7 years.
Yeah.
And 7 years from the end of the project.
Yeah.
Not the project. The accounting standards have got quite broad over recent times, and they require businesses to keep records that support their business decision making for 7 years as well. So I think it's reasonably safe to go with 7 years post.
Well, the professional.
There's sector legislation that says otherwise.
Professional indemnity would be good.
Yeah, so sorry about age, in terms of children, that period is much longer.
Yeah.
So when you're a child, that information has to be kept for an extraordinary longer period of time.
You actually have to keep it. Sorry, I used to be a medical receptionist in my previous life. If you see a patient as a child, you have to keep the data from 7 years after they turn 18. So if you see them when they're 3, you actually have to keep it till they're 25. So when you're legally an adult and can request access to it or make a challenge of malpractice or whatever, you've got to have that 7 years.
Well, it's interesting, if we use a professional indemnity model, then that's a good basis. We all need to have that insurance, right, to practice. And talking again about sort of what's happening overseas, so in the UK, there were so many court cases, court challenges to projects on the basis of inadequate consultation that they set up a special court to deal with just those cases, right? So it's a massive issue, right? And in those circumstances, the data is critical, so it can happen at any time. So maybe that's kind of the principal issue.
Well, if you're a director of a company and you step down, you have to keep more director records, and this gets a bit complicated, you approach your directorship as well. So I think each of you as individuals probably just need to have a look at that.
And then if you're in the state, from state to state, legislation is different around stakeholder reporting requirements and record keeping, not specific to a stakeholder, just if there's a transaction between stakeholders, keeping their records indefinitely and in a particular format.
Just before I get to you, the case study that made me think of this topic, there wasn't actually even a requirement, a legal requirement to have this data when they unpacked it, because once they discovered that the data couldn't be restored, it couldn't be accessed, they kind of got advice on it, and the legislation doesn't require them to have it, but it's kind of almost like, you don't have it, you're screwed, we're going to get you. So it's it's such a mess.
So one thing I think probably a lot of people don't know in terms of health as well, there's Commonwealth legislation that if you are collecting information about health or wellness of a person or a healthcare professional, whether it's identifiable or not, if you're using a cloud-based system to collect that information, the cloud must be hosted in Australia and it can't be hosted anywhere else. So people who put out SurveyMonkey or Gizmo surveys are actually in contravention of Commonwealth law.
Yeah.
Because that information is actually managed under the Patriots Act and is entirely different to our legislation. And it's amazing how many people have no idea that you can't collect that information.
And
unless
manage
you're
it.
using an Australian-based survey.
Yes, state legislation supports that. We're from the ACT, and I remember a couple of years ago I was trying to run even just lead generation campaigns through Facebook. So you don't even have to leave Facebook to sign up for like an email newsletter or something. You're not allowed to do that because there's no guarantee, as a government agency, you're not allowed to do that because there's no guarantee that that data will be stored on Australian shores.
Yeah.
So all of the data that we store has to be
MailChimp, Gmail, all of those products are not stored, no guarantee. And I mean, Gmail now has servers in Australia, but only very recently. And you've got to.
It's changed the way we work completely.
And when you think about the sort of notes people take door knocking on controversial projects, often you will talk about people's, mental health almost, right? But because it is a risk and something you have to note when you're going door knocking, and then you're in that territory.
Absolutely, and I mean, a lot of construction projects, we have stakeholders disclosing mental health or other conditions as part of the complaint process.
So that would be considered sensitive information. So, like personal information also includes, well, in our data breach, we sort of took a view that a lot of our data that was breached were your professional email address, your professional phone number, but it's all called personal data. So we had to inform everybody we knew that their data had been breached, even though it was just an email address in some cases, because it was if it was an unidentifiable info, like an info at somebody or other, we didn't have to do that. But if it was Charlie at, we had to know that somebody's been asked if they now have your email address. And for phishing, that's what they do.
Yeah.
So we all had those phishing emails, and you wonder where they come from. It's because somebody has had a data breach and you just don't know. And they might not know about it either.
The other thing
I'll
too.
also say it's because somebody doesn't know actually how to use BCC as well. On their emails, that's where the best phishing happens. Blind carbon copy.
Yeah,
They get into the whole database.
The other thing to take note of also, just before we wrap up this topic, is that when you're storing that backup file, it needs to be encrypted. Because increasingly legislation is that data, personal information needs to be encrypted in transit and at rest. So again, you're using spreadsheets, it's not encrypted in transit, right? Or at rest in most cases. So keep that in mind if you're storing it. Just talk to IT, whatever it needs, wherever you put it, needs to be stored in a particular way. Any last comments on that before we move to topic 2?
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left as well, so Do we want to make time for that general Q&A as well?
Yeah, would you rather do general discussion?
And we've got the roaming mics, or we've got another option with Menti where you can just get your questions up on the screen if there's something that you want to ask but you don't want to put your hand up and ask it.
Well,
We're all
Keep
together.
going, just through the.
keep going.
Yeah, okay.
So the social media and other tracking, so interestingly, you know, I mean, we all know about Facebook Analytica and all that drama, right? How many people here are getting social media tracking, monitoring, as part of their media monitoring? And what information are you getting, and do you have the legitimate reason to keep that information? So I've been in clients' offices where I've looked at their social media reports and gone, holy shit, I didn't know you could get all that information and match it. So now, you know, with this increasing rise of big data where people can connect you. So in the past, you had large data sets and you couldn't connect it to people and individuals as easily, whereas now it's super easy to do that. You know, you have an email address or you have a location, all this stuff, you can literally get so much information on people. So it's something we do almost as standard practice now, right? We think as part of our community engagement, we've got to track, you know, what people are saying on social media channels. I wanted to throw that out there because I think there's a real risk in there, a risk factor, especially if you're keeping it and then you're linking it to the people. You know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what else are you storing with them? You know, through connecting those two data points, are there other things you're breaching? So anyone getting that piece of BuzzFeed and all of those kind of things? Not something you guys encounter? A little bit? Yeah. Those reports, like, you know, it actually, I mean, the reason I notice is because I have an anonymous Twitter account, right? Because I want to talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about and not have it associated with my business. And I've gone to extreme lengths to hide myself. Like, you know, I know a little bit about data. And when I looked at that, I went, okay, if I've ever been in the same location and logged into the same device, you know, that's it, my privacy's gone. Even though I've gone to extreme lengths. So, you know, you need to never be the same Wi-Fi, the same location, at the same time. And, you know, it's crazy what they can connect.
Has anyone ever downloaded the data that Facebook has stored about you? Because you can log in and you can request it and they'll send you a file and it's a zip and you can open it up. Because I did that after the Cambridge Analytica and I was so shocked. They had my contacts, even if I wasn't connected with them on Facebook. They knew when I had phoned them on my mobile, even if I'd made a mobile call, not a Facebook call. It had knew where I had been, at what time. It's really crazy the information that can be out there about you that you've got here.
Well, this is the basis of the ACCC's case against Google, because they didn't disclose they were storing people's location and the websites they accessed and other behaviours, phone calls and stuff. So, you know, we're kind of in that space where we need to be addressing this issue, I think, you know, because we're collecting it as part of our communications plans and stuff, and I'm not sure that we're sort of really aware enough of what our obligations are and what our risks are. Because the risks don't just sit with necessarily just with the government department you're working for or whoever. There can be some personal liabilities as well with that.
It isn't that we seek the benefit and we're willing to take the risk. Because you look at a lot of the apps we download and we really want what the app's going to do for us, and then it says, I need access to your contacts, I need access to your photos, I need access, and we go, oh, I really want to play it. And why does Encryption need access to my contacts? Like, why does it? But we hit the button anyway, don't we?
Just kick off Encryption.
And Bitmoji.
People don't care. Oh, sorry, do you want to go?
A quick question, and maybe I may have missed it, but may not know. I was just keen to know some of what the actual penalties are for being convicted of a data breach here in Australia. So we even just
Got what they are.
I should probably Google, but I'm just curious to know that.
There are fines. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. Sorry, I should have looked it up.
I can't remember.
Depends on whether it's personal or sensitive information, and it depends on the actions you took and whether you complied with your requirements, the minimum requirements. So there's all these variables, but they can be quite significant for a director or responsible person. So as a CEO, I'm a responsible person. I'm not really, no, I am. Yeah, so, but I think it's just around, all of us do this all the time, because this is who we are, we do the right thing. So, but once you are aware of something, you should just make sure you put it in place. And as you've been talking, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity perhaps for IAP2 to provide some examples. So we had to have a data breach response plan. So as an organisation, we have one. So, you know, could it be an example for our members?
So OAIC has got all of these resources on their website. It's actually it's a really good website. It gives you templates for notifying them. It gives you really clear steps. Even if the actual act is unclear, so what defines risk of serious harm, it does really take you through the process of what to do once you've identified a breach and how you go about telling people and the things you should do and when you should do them. It's got a lot of information to draw from, and it's I think I spent a whole week on there when I was helping develop our internal data breach response plan, just understanding the nuances of the information that you have to provide your stakeholders, the information that you have to provide the OASC. Are you an ASX listed company and you have to tell the ASX because they've got their own continuous disclosure requirements that they have to adhere to as well.
We should really unpack this, right, for our industry in the Australian context. I wrote, if you're interested in the GDPR implications for engagement, I wrote an ebook on it when it first came out. It's on our website, on our Darzin website. You can have a look at it. Where I just try to kind of take what the key bits of the legislation, because I had to read it to see if we comply. And so I thought, well, while I'm reading it, I'll just kind of try and explain what the implications are in the consultation, they call it consultation there, context. So, it would be great if someone, not me, creates an Australian version of that, like a really simplified guide to here's what it means for you when you're doing community engagement, here's what you can and can't do. Just tips like, what your consent forms need to look like, what you need to ask, it's doable and we should do it, because it would be a good resource.
Come out with a disclosure saying that you need to get legal advice.
Of course, yeah, and same in my book.
And that's why all of the examples I used for is it yes, no, maybe on a data breach were all maybe, because not a lawyer, I can't tell you, and it is such specific to the circumstances. And there can be breaches that aren't notifiable, but as engagement practitioners or comms people or just decent human beings, you still feel that you need to tell people or put something on your website or publish on your social media, and it's just this this huge grey area. What does risk of serious harm look like? I think one of our colleagues talked about an example where the phone numbers had been no name, just phone numbers had been provided, but that was enough for then call centres to start phoning that person every single day, and some harassing calls as well. And then you start going, well, that maybe didn't have their name, it didn't have their address, and initially you'd say, no, that's not a notifiable breach. But if that person starts getting harassing calls every day or every hour, then that's notifiable, and they're obviously at harm as a result of that if their mental health starts to degrade. So it's this huge grey area.
Is that such a thing you can't define what's a serious risk for somebody else?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, the OAICD will actually investigate too. So our lawyer advised us, given that we had email addresses, phone numbers, names, business names, so they're like in a government department or a council. So it's all readily available. In fact, with some of our members, I actually did Google to see how much information was actually freely available. That is irrelevant. That is actually just a distraction. So we reported it all. We did a full audit. It was incredibly labour intensive, and it was very small volume. So if you think about Red Cross, they had 60,000 records. We had 1,300 records. It was small volume, and it was considered like they audited us, they interviewed me, and they sent us a letter saying that they thank you so much for taking this practice approach. We consider the matter closed. So we just followed it to the letter, absolutely, even though my opinion, like you could look me up online and get all of that information is so easily, but that's the way our lawyers told us to interpret it.
The other thing to keep keep in mind, I think as practitioners, is that we can actually sort of avoid a lot of this by how we plan for our data. You know, what should we be collecting and how should we collect it? Do you have protocols in place at the start of your project that says, will I record people's mental health issues? And if I do need to record it because there is a legitimate reason for it, how am I going to secure that? How am I going to log that? Can I make that record confidential and restrict access to it? Or can I store it in a slightly different database, you know, or something, just so that I can take even more care about that one, right? So if you're just doing it, but also if you're, you know, if it's a free-for-all, people can write whatever they want. You've got junior staff door knocking, they don't know. You need to, this is where having a plan in place and protocols established will help you avoid most of it, because you can kind of have your data structured really well and, you know, consider most of these things in advance.
And training the people that are going to do that work for you, because that's the important thing, and to explain to them why that's an issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, breach criminal practices, I mean, we were talking about Excel. We have 499 records, or 499 members that we had to send a letter to, because one team member sent an email with an Excel spreadsheet attached to it to another team member. And so that was sort of put up in the approach.
If you go and look at the data as to the breakdown of what types of breaches there were in that first year, there were 2 instances of faxes being sent to the wrong people. Like, who even faxes anymore? But doctors, the medical professionals,
And the medicos go,
and it can be as simple, and that's why I included the human error stat. You know, I think a lot of us go about thinking about hacking and cybersecurity, and, you know, no one hates me, no one's going to attack me, no one's, you know, out there to get me. But it could just be as simple as going out for a coffee and leaving your notebook behind that you took on that door knocking exercise, and you get back to the office and you're like, shit, where's it gone? But you've left it at the public library, and that's where all the counsellors work, and suddenly that person's opinions and name and everything, it can get into the wrong hands so easily. And
I've been emailed a spreadsheet by mistake, and I was like, oh my gosh. It was like an ex-political staffer, so it was the dirt file, and they sent it to me completely by mistake. I was like, I really want to read this. This is so interesting. I had a couple of lines, and then I was like, stop it, don't look at it. I'm not allowed to see this, and you're not allowed to keep this. Now that you work for a government agency, you really can't keep this information.
But it is about training and awareness, because I think if you don't have those conversations, especially with junior team members, like, you know, we've got a procedure in place that people are aware of. So if you do something like forget to BCC all your recipients and you go, oh, probably shouldn't have done that, there's a line of report to make sure that it gets escalated quickly and to the right people so that you can put those procedures in place. But if your team don't know what your procedures are, or that that's even an issue, then they won't. And then 2 weeks later, when you're in the newspaper because such and such has written in about how their email and all their things was BCC'd on this email, then you've got a really big problem.
Last
Reputation.
2 minutes if you want to summarise.
Yep, so back up here. So, as we said, data breaches aren't always cyber breaches, and they often involve human error. I think we've talked about that quite extensively now, and the importance of training and communication within your teams to ensure that people are aware of what to look for so that you can respond appropriately if required. And to be aware of your own practices. I know we didn't finish the current practices quiz, but I hope there are enough thoughts and triggers in there for you to go away and have a think within your organisations and your teams about what things you could do differently, what things you could do better, or what you need to learn more about so that you can make informed decisions about your engagement practice and your data management practices. And please ditch the spreadsheet. You can do better, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Just do some research and look at what the options are, because we can do better, and I would hope that, you know, next year no one would ever discuss having their stakeholder database in multiple tabs of a spreadsheet that are 500 rows long with 10 different versions. Thank you.